What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Claims Podcast. I'm here with Suzanne Ganier, JD. She is a legal operations and insurance expert. Suzanne, great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Suzanne, I had to point out that you had a JD, given that if I had one, I'd be using that at every opportunity I had. But also looking at your background, there's a lot in here. So would you mind sharing a little bit of how you got into law and then maybe where your career has taken you so far?
Sure. First, let me say I really appreciate you including the JD, considering that I have obtained licenses in 4 states. So I took 4 bar exams. And so as many people as I can mention that makes me feel better about doing something so crazy. 3 of them are inactive, but my license in Florida is active. So thank you for mentioning the JD.
Most welcome.
I started out in the insurance industry as a baby lawyer back a long time ago. I'm not going to say when, because I'm not going to tell you my age. I started working for the Chicago Transit Authority. And if you're not familiar with Chicago, the Chicago Transit Authority is responsible for running the buses and train lines that go through the city. So lots of slip and falls, people getting in car accidents with buses, some train accidents, things like that. I can say that I do have the experience that people absolutely, positively do jump onto the bus after the accident, hoping they can get paid. But it was a great start and taught me how to litigate and look at tort cases, personal injury cases. From there, I moved on to a private firm, Query and Harrow. They were an outside firm that did some work for CTA on some of their larger cases. So it was a natural transition. There I had exposure to a number of other large carriers, State Farm, CNA, those are the 2, Zurich, yes, that I had exposure to, and I handled all kinds of litigation. I did coverage work, I did some bad faith work, and I tried cases to verdict, which these days not a lot of people try cases to verdict. I was with Query and Harrow for about 4 years, and just as they were talking about wanting me to go out into marketing, which is something I didn't want to do, I got in a position with in-house counsel for Zurich, and handled, in addition to injury claims and coverage bad faith, I was also doing some claims and litigation management, and also doing a lot of construction type cases. After about 2 years with Zurich, I was recruited out of the blue to become Progressive Insurance's Illinois House Counsel. So I ran that House Counsel office for a couple of years. Again, in addition to the standard things that you would do practicing law, I was also responsible for budgets, making sure that we were in budget, other KPIs that I had to meet. I was managing a team of 5, had to create process, procedure, things like that to make the office run more efficiently. I also worked very closely with the claims team on claim management and some coverage issues. And from there, I moved to Arizona to be closer to family. And the first year I spent with a law firm doing same type of thing, insurance type of work, defense, coverage, etc. I started also I did a lot of work in the trucking industry, trucking type cases. I was with them for about a year, and then when they wanted me to start marketing, it was time to go back in-house, and I went back in-house with CMA, their Arizona council office. They handled liability and construction defect cases all over the state. Most of my work was on the liability side, and I literally traveled the state litigating and handling cases, and found out that Arizona is quite a large state when you're driving it all the time.
Right.
From there, in 2008, I was recruited to come to Louisiana and become the Director of Litigation and Legal Operations for Louisiana Citizens Property Insurance Corporation. Louisiana Citizens is a quasi-governmental entity and statutorily created insurance company that is designed to provide insurance for those property owners that cannot get insurance on the private market, meaning they can't go and get a policy from Allstate or State Farm because of the nature of the risk. And generally here you're talking about homes that are right up against the water, some that are actually in the water, those types of things. I started there and was brought in to resolve about 7,000 Katrina and Rita cases that had been pretty much stalled for the better part of 2 years, and to also help resolve 4 class actions with a combined value of over $1 billion, which would have wiped out the company. I was with Citizens until the fall of 2010, when they had a change at the top in terms of the CEO. It's a very political organization, and so when there was a new person at the top, they wanted to bring in their own people. So I moved on and moved to Florida, where I was corporate counsel for Main Street America Group. There I was much more involved in things like products, getting products ready to be put out on the market, making sure they met regulations, writing coverage language, addressing issues in market conduct exams, compliance, and a lot of corporate governance, getting ready for board meetings, proxy votes, conflict of interest things. And then I also managed all their corporate litigation. My father became ill in late 2012, and so in early 2013, I moved back to Louisiana, and I started my own business, Alexi Professional Services, and I basically did everything I was qualified to do, which included practicing law, taking on law cases. I did a lot of expert work in the insurance industry, in which I was a consulting and testifying expert, and handled a number of cases like that. And I also did a lot of consulting in claims litigation management and legal spend management and legal auditing. During that time, I came across Elevate, and they were at a point that they wanted to build and grow a legal bill review business line, and offered me the opportunity to build and grow that line. And that was an opportunity that I could not pass up. So I took that position and grew that business from one client and me and another person to a business with that has about 1.5 million per year in revenue and 30 employees in 4 service centers across the globe. So I was responsible from everything that you would do, from running a business, from all of the financials, customer service issues, escalation point, hiring, strategic planning, and even doing review itself when we needed extra people to do review. I left there in February of 2014 to explore other opportunities, and that's how we got here. So a very long answer, but it's been a pretty busy career.
So by the sounds of it, you're a pretty lazy person looking at all this. Oh my gosh. Wow. This is
Yes.
quite a list. This is incredible. I mean, I don't really know. There's a lot of meat to this. I'm almost thinking you should be running this podcast instead of me. This is fantastic. So
Yeah, I come from my dad was a very hard worker and instilled that in me. So I'm not afraid of hard work. I thrive off of it, and the bigger the challenge, the better.
No joke. And it seems like that's kind of from the small things to massive things. As a small thing example, you handily beat me onto this call. So you pay attention, it seems, to every little detail, and then even can expand that view to take a business to 1.5 million in sales. That's incredible. You and another person?
She was my first person that I hired to do review. And she was the first person to move into a supervisor role and then into a manager role. She was my right and left hand. And, she and I joke about that. I interviewed her in the break room in our original space with people walking in and out to get coffee. And the fact that she and I spent countless hours stuck in an itty bitty room in a Phoenix office in which we couldn't get the temperature correct. So for a half hour, we were blazing hot. And then the next half hour, we were freezing cold. So it was strange things like that. But
that's hilarious.
Yeah, that's why I say it's very typical of running a small business, where you do everything from helping to get the customers in and implementation to putting the cups in the dishwasher.
It's funny. I love all those little small detail stories about where folks started. I remember back to where we started as an example, kitchen table. So it can come from very humble beginnings. And while we didn't have anything going wrong with the AC, we had a door that didn't fully close. So we had kind of full access to everything that was going on outside by choice when we wanted it, or even when we didn't. So it's funny to look back and see how far we've come from things like that. And if you can survive things like that, obviously you can survive pretty much anything in the business world. Like, that's pretty impressive, I have to say.
I totally agree with you. I remember when we moved in to our new location in the same general mall, but just in a bigger office. And I remember the first time I walked into what we referred to as the bullpen, where all of the reviewers that were working in the United States were going to sit. And I just stood there and I just looked around and I was like, I couldn't believe it. I got kind of choked up. It was like, oh my God, this is amazing. How did we get here? It was,
right.
It was a really big moment to think back to when we couldn't get the temperature controlled. Brent and I couldn't get the temperature controlled. And now we have all of this space. And, we looked at each other and said, we're not going to know what to do with all this space. Right. But it was filled with people and activity. So it's a memory I treasure.
That's really interesting. I think coming from that perspective, it's an experience that not many people will get. And it's ironic that we both happen to start bill review service companies. And so there's so much in your background that I'd love to double click on. But given that this has been the most recent thing we've talked about, we'd love to look at that also from a buyer's perspective, being in that space, have to say I'd love to know your kind of experiences in terms of what did you see change over that period? What was still not quite there by the time you'd left? And then what do you see as the opportunity for the future? So a three-parter.
Those are great questions. Starting out, particularly because we had a number of customers that had not done bill review on their legal bills before, it was very much a job of change management and education to get them to understand really why this was important for their bottom line, and to show them really where their money was going. And even, we had some very large clients that you would think, just based upon their name, that they would be more sophisticated in that area, and they just absolutely weren't. So as we started out, it was very much, educational and change management. The other issue that was a big issue that we had throughout my time there, and I don't think will ever be an issue that goes away, is resistance from not only outside counsel, but resistance from in-house counsel that were doing final approval on the bills. We found that many of the in-house counsel were approving bills from firms from which they used to work. So there was a slight conflict of interest there. And so it always at some point it came to a head when there was a clash between legal operations and the attorneys, and we would be caught in the middle wondering which one was going to prevail. 9 times out of 10, the attorneys prevailed, and so there were challenges in really getting to the sweet spot in the review that was providing savings and ROI to the customer without alienating in-house counsel and also outside counsel. So that was always a tightrope that we walked. The one time that the legal operations side won, the head of the GC and head of legal operations we were at an on-site meeting and could not have been clearer about knock it off. What they reduce, leave it alone. And he was very, very strong about it. And I remember my manager, Jeff, and I looking at each other with our mouths open because we just didn't experience that. Over time, a lot of the things that changed had to do not so much with specific requests from clients, but more from a desire to make the process more efficient so that we could increase our margin. And that was done in various ways, using shortcuts when you were doing review, moving, a lot of our resources and things like that onto SharePoint so that they were available to the entire team. Developing automatic processes that could review and flag IP prosecution invoices that were outside of compliance, rather than to having to go through one at a time. And there were usually, there could often be 200, 300 of those. Really, and then also really finding ways to better report our results so that they weren't just numbers and graphs on a page, but they were reports that supported our analyses, of what was happening on the account, what was happening with their spend, and what we foresaw as trends going forward. Over the time, we would see that the bill review would really be a door that opened up into opportunities for other areas in the organization. For instance, matter management, contract management, e-discovery, all kinds of things like that were opened up through bill review, frequently because the companies were getting an ROI and saving money that they could then use to pay for these other things. So it was essentially nothing out of their pocket. So we would see where we would go deeper and become stickier with these organizations. Since I've left, and in particular with the COVID situation that we've all been dealing with for the past 3 months, I really expect to see general counsel who are going to be under just much more pressure to cut costs and increase efficiencies. And not only to cut costs and increase efficiencies, but cut costs and get more for what they're paying for more, throw this in also, throw that service in also. Services that normally would be considered to be outside the scope of a bill review contract will now be within scope and not paid for as an add-on to the service.
Right.
I think that's going to be something we're going to see across the board, not just in spend management, but in legal services as a whole.
It's funny you say that. We were just doing an RFP yesterday, and I'm trying to avoid being too salesy here, but it is very relevant for what we're doing, and I have very recent experience with this. Yesterday, we were going against a couple folks in an LBR, legal bill review RFP, and I think a big differentiator that we'd actually had just sat on and chewed a little bit was the idea that, to your point, everything is included under one flat rate. And that's the pricing model we've gone with. And it seems to be that there are a lot of folks still stuck in this percent of spend and a la carte, where there's a core offering and they'll show you everything, but the bill you get is that core offering and those bells and whistles are add-on. So want to be a little bit more equitable to the client in that way, both from the flat cost and the all-in-one package. To add to that, between LBR and enterprise legal management software or claims management software, matter management software, we tend to throw in LBR with one of those softwares or vice versa. It tends to be, to your point, exactly right, part and parcel now of filling out these RFPs or servicing clients in this space. And it's particularly large insurance carriers that are doing it or seem to be the most eager to get this started. If you were in their seat, how would you be thinking about approaching legal bill review now? Is it something that you can wait to see how things play out? Is it something you want to have in place before anything happens, or any other color on those last couple comments?
I completely agree with you. We also did fixed fee pricing as well and had a package that was, you get the review, you get the handling, first line communication, handling the appeals, essentially acting as a gatekeeper between outside counsel and the client on billing issues. And then also the basic reporting package was thrown in with that as well. If I was looking at this now, I would be looking to find a company that could really show me how technology is really going to make the difference in terms of how long it takes to review bills and what the cost is going to be. I see that the cost pressures are going to likely push costs down, meaning that the service providers will not be able to charge as much as before, and that they're going to be asked to do more with less. So with your example of throwing in those other types of software with what you're including, I think that's going to be quite attractive, particularly when you can, the more that you can limit the amount that a human has to do, and the more that you don't need to rely on human review. And not to sound like I'm pandering to you, your program biller is very much a program that I can see really doing that and being a game changer, because you really are using machine learning in the way that people vision that it would work. And so if I'm looking for somebody to help me control my costs, the very first thing I'm going to do is look at some type of bill review. It's easy to install and get going, and it's a low hanging fruit. But now I'm also going to be looking for a little bit more than just a service. I'm going to want to get the best combination of service and technology on the market, and make sure that the cost I'm paying for it gives I'm getting more than just a 2x ROI. I'm looking at it, I want a 3x or a 4x ROI, so that I can do other things and work differently with outside counsel. And that kind of brings me to the next thing I'd be doing after I kind of got that going. I would really start focusing on outside counsel, specifically their rates, their pricing, the hourly model for charging clients, their generally overall lack of efficiency, and really pushing the firms to say, we know you hate change, but it's, if you don't change, this firm over here will do X, Y, and Z for less, and will do it in ways that are much more efficient. So I know we've been with you for a long time, but the world has changed. So, you're competing now with this. And I'd really be looking at smaller, more boutique firms that can offer different and more creative fee structures. So I could get away from the hourly fee structure, get away from the arguments of, well, this is the way we've always done it, which is, the argument that drives me up the wall the most. And just just really encouraging and bringing in legal firms that never had that opportunity before, that were always, they weren't big law, they weren't Am Law top 50. Those are, in many cases, the vast majority of them have been around for so long that the idea of changing is like herding cats. And I think they are going to be forced into doing things differently, or they're going to get left behind. And I will be curious to see what things look like as business starts to get more back to normal, but at the same time, people are addressing the outcomes in terms of recession and hopefully not depression.
Very good points, and a lot to dig into based on all of that. I'm definitely going to have to call you back for another podcast. But as a final question, until I ask for kind of closing thoughts, and then obviously send you your check for the Billa shout out halfway through. That's a joke. Would love to just dig into a couple things you said there as kind of a final detail, and would love to have people kind of begging to come back for more, because I think there's a ton in your background that would, or just areas you're very knowledgeable about, that would be good to look into. ROI was a good one. I think that's something we kind of, for the first time, especially yesterday, we're doing in terms of net savings, in terms of savings less our cost. What does that look like as a multiple of our cost? And what does that look like in year one versus an ongoing basis if you have an implementation fee, for example? So would love to know, how is that how you think about ROI? Is it kind of the net savings versus the cost of the software? I mean, we also bake in, there's an element of time savings and other efficiencies. But one final thing before I turn it back to you is an interesting concept. I'm kind of giving away a little bit of the secret sauce here, but as a concept to play on the idea of giving smaller firms a chance. I totally agree with you that it's ridiculous. Large firms sometimes won't comply in terms of their billing standards. So to hear a massive insurance company or a large Fortune 500 company say their lawyers bill the way they do when they're the client and the law firm or the lawyer, in theory, is the vendor, is a little out there for me. But I totally agree to kind of, if you can't get around that dynamic, you've got to kind of help these smaller firms. And what we're looking at doing as a sort of secret sauce is a kind of panel ranking of all the law firms in their space, in whatever client is using the management software space. And that could include factors such as kind of timeliness to close, satisfaction score from whoever they're dealing with, combined operating ratio impact, if any, litigation day average compared to the rest of the law firms, things like that, to try and help those smaller guys rank higher. They're typically the ones who are going to be fine to use the e-billing platforms, use the leads codes, things like that. So I guess a two-parter question. Do you see, and you touched on machine learning as well there, would love to know how you kind of think about ROI firstly, and then secondly, beyond machine learning, do you think there's anything else out there as a low-hanging fruit that not many people are aware of now, either on the insurance side, the vendor side, or large enterprise side? So that could be automation, AI, blockchain to get crazier. But so ROI and kind of future features that are not quite there yet.
Yes, on the ROI, we very much look at ROI the way that you described it. And we didn't just look at it either in terms of just the dollars and cents, meaning customer is paying X, they're receiving Y savings. You do the calculation, you come up with the ROI. We also measured efficiency and time savings by looking at, okay, what's the average per hour cost that in-house attorney would likely charge, which is, usually a very big assumption. And those that are looking at it would prefer not to be and prefer to be doing other things. So that efficiency ROI is a huge piece of why the bill review is important. As far as I think machine learning is really the key as far as how we go forward. And I think it's the key because it's the most realistic. I see a lot of articles about AI, and I see some articles about blockchain, and I'm sure you see those also. And a lot of it is, just theory. I've not seen any particular, actual programs or platforms that are actually truly using AI. I know that some people are testing it and are doing some things with it, but it's not there yet. Right now, I feel like it's more of, something you say with a customer so they know that, you're up on the latest thing, even though when it comes right down to it, you're not going to be really applying any AI to what you're doing, because that functionality, that ability does not yet exist.
I hear. I think that makes sense, and I'm glad you differentiated between the two, machine learning and AI. There, it's true that there are steps from just basic data gathering and standardization to very basic machine learning to reasonably sophisticated machine learning, all the way through to the point where, in theory, code could be adding code itself based on what it's learning or the refined data set coming through. So it's an important thing to point out there, and good to know about the ROI too. I think there's so many ways to slice that. It's important to think about everything that's potentially out there, and not only for us, but also I'm sure insurance companies, and I'm sure Fortune 500 clients with a lot of vendor spend, either legal or non-legal, also have to have those types of things as top of mind in terms of vendor selection and just in general operating efficiency. So appreciate you sharing all of that. There's so much to dig into in your background. I could do another 5 hours of this, but just to leave people wanting more, I'll let you wrap it up with any final thoughts that you may have, and then wanted to ask, how do people get in touch with you?
Sure. And I could talk about this with you for 5 hours. This is a subject that I am passionate about, and as strange as that sounds, most people don't understand what I do, and I don't try and explain it and why am I, and then they're like, why are you so excited about it? It's just what I like to do. My final thoughts are that I think going forward, and I don't have a crystal ball, I really expect that that there's going to be a real shift in the way legal services are provided and paid for as we move through this pandemic, and companies are looking at things differently. And that's partially because of the effects of the pandemic. But I also think that now that there has been one, even though we've been warned forever that there was going to be one, now that there has been one, I think there's also going to be, that change is also going to be sourced in preparing for the next thing, whatever that may be. If it's a pandemic, if it's some type of, major weather event, what have you. So I think there's going to be a lot of change in how services are provided and paid for because of that. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can reach me at my email address, which is S as in Sam, M as in Marie, G as in George, A as in Apple, N is in Nancy, I as in ice cream, E as in elephant, R as in run, at outlook.com, or I'm also available at my phone number, 504-722-2962. Again, 504-722-2962. And I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you can always find me there as well.
Wonderful, Suzanne. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Everyone, Suzanne Ganier, legal operations and insurance expert. Thanks so much for being on the Claims podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.